So, Anthony, one of the key differences when we're talking about pain is being able to sell and solve to the pain, not to the problem. When you solve to the problem, ultimately what you've got is a lot of competition there. It's the issue that they're sharing, maybe even with competition. When you get that conversation comfortably down to pain, prospects in a lot of cases have never said what they're talking to you about out loud with anyone else before. It's a different issue, right? The problem they've got on that surface level becomes this deeper rooted, well understood problem that becomes pain, and that pain is a blue ocean strategy. You're not fighting competitors when you get there.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to cover with Erik Meier the most important part of sales experience is uncovering the reason for doing business, right? Erik, we've studied the sales process, and let's kind of go back a little bit and kind of take people back to where we started and why we're getting ready to start this section.
Yeah, absolutely, Anthony. So we've talked a little bit about the problem that most sales interactions kind of create, that buyer-seller dance. So we dug into that a little bit, and then we talked about some bonding and rapport principles, some of the core characteristics to building and developing relationships. It's a pretty important first stage. And then we dove into upfront contracts. So, talking about how we want to frame a meeting, what are some of the conditions for interacting and engaging between prospects and salespeople along the path to working together or not. And then that kind of brings us forward here to this concept of what we call pain.
Pain. So let's talk about pain. So when you're saying pain, this is the hard part, or this is give me what do you mean by pain?
Yeah. So, if we could kind of break it down here. So, this is a good place, I think, to jump off and dive in today. So, pain and problems are two different things. And often, one of the challenges that a sales professional has along the way of navigating a conversation with a potential client is that they don't really get to what we would call pain. They stick on this problem issue, right? And if I could give a quick example of what that might look like, because there's a difference between one and the other. The problem is the problem that a prospect figured out on their own. So what they're looking at in their environment, in their world, they say, hey, here's an issue we should go out and try to find a solution to. This is what we think we've got a problem with. And while it's true, right, that it is a problem, the pain is the thing that a good, well-intentioned, well-developed sales professional can help that prospect understand, which is usually about 3 or 4 layers deeper. So if you had, let's say, like a CNC machine shop owner, right, and they've got a couple of these CNC machines around their shop, the problem they'll identify is, this one machine's got down cycle issues, right? It's not up and running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week like the other ones. It's got some kind of maintenance problem. It's going down. So that's the problem. And they go out to look for a solution to that, right? This down cycle issue for the CNC machine. Now, there are plenty of people that are trying to sell to solve that problem. The biggest challenge, I think, is they're competing against each other pretty heavily, except for maybe one seller who asks a couple of better questions. And so they say, well, tell me a little bit about this machine going down. And the owner says, well, it goes down, on average twice a month, right? And the seller says, well, but how many units does it produce on a day? They say, well, it produces about 100 units on a day. And then that seller says, so it goes down twice a month, all day, produces about 100 units a day. How long has it been doing this? And the owner says, it's been doing it for the last 2 years, as far as I'm sure, right? And then the seller says, well, what's the average cost per unit? And the owner says, well, it's about $10,000. And so, Anthony, I'll let the audience do the math on that. But the problem might be that there's a down cycle, but the pain is, a couple $1 million in lost productivity. And if we go deep enough, maybe some lost clients. It's a different issue. Fair?
And that for me has been, when I talk to construction professionals, right?
Yep.
They've got this need to turn projects over on time, right? For us, there's two sides. The construction management side, when I'm talking to them, they need someone to help them manage that process, right? They're the person that's in the development role, right? They sit at a desk and every day somebody else walks in their office with a different need. And how do I staff? Am I staffing for the bottom of my cycle or at the top of my cycle? And trying to help them understand that pain, every time that person walks in, or every time an opportunity walks in from the company to need something to get done, hey, now we're gonna go look at how do we help them support that, right? So that they figured out the problem. Hey, look, I need to get stuff done. Now we're gonna help them support them on the deeper conversation, which says, now we're gonna be that outlet. So as that your boss walks in and goes, hey, I now need to add in 60 more remodels, or I need to add in conversions over in this marketplace. Now you've got an outlet to go there and fulfill the company's need, because ultimately, what does that generate for the company in revenue and product, product
Yep.
identification, all the stuff that's happening. So I love where you're going with that. I love finding the pain, not the problem. The problem, I guess, they figured out the problem. Now we got to, okay, got it. Thanks.
Absolutely. And you start thinking there's like three layers, and we could go deeper than that in the time we've got today. But the three layers usually look like this. There's a surface issue. Again, that's the thing that a potential client's kind of figured out on their own, right? And then you get into some of the reasons why that's a problem specifically for them. And that'll change from company to company, person to person, right? And starts to narrow it down. And then where you really find pain is where you get to personal and financial impact. And once you've got that uncovered, it's a real issue. It needs to be taken care of. Now, it's not about fabricating pain, right? And I think that's important for everyone to listen to and understand. Sometimes the problem is just a problem. It hasn't baked long enough to be a real actionable pain. And, we should be comfortably disengaged if that's the right thing to do, because it's not a big enough issue. But if you can take it from that surface level down to the reasons it's happening, land on the impact, and agree mutually between both parties that it costs more to keep this problem than it costs to invest in buying a solution, well, it's a smart thing to do to buy something, right? I think that's always a good way to look at the pain too, because we'll talk about budget in one of these sessions coming up. People and companies will buy solutions to problems they know cost more to keep than it costs to invest in solving. But they'll keep problems that cost, less to keep than it costs to buy a solution to. And why wouldn't they? Right? Yeah. So you've got all these different layers. Yep.
I love that. So finding, I love where you go back and go disengage, right? Because there may be a time when you realize I can't get anywhere, right? I'm not, or I'm here. I don't want to go fabricate something, right? This is one of the hardest part for a seasoned salesperson, is to understand that, that may not be a sale here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of our favorite rules in Sandler is no pain, no sale. So, the seller may have done some research and thinks there's a problem worth taking action on. But if that can't be articulated from the prospect's perspective, then it's not real enough, and there's no emotional attachment to take action on it. And the right thing there would be to disengage. You can always come back. That's a beautiful part of problems, Anthony. They don't fix themselves. So even if it's not the right time, you've probably observed this. How many people haven't taken action? You talk to them again a year later, it's just 10 times worse, right? So it won't fix itself. If it's not the right time, that's okay. It will become at some point. You want to make sure you stay in contact. But we want to understand really, what is this reference for pain? How do we get there? And I remember, learning in a different career from some well-intentioned trainers, one of the keys to uncovering pains is to ask good questions. And I've always been, kind of one of these people that listens to that and go, yeah, okay, good. I get that. Right. That makes sense. But then what specific questions? Like, what are the questions to ask to get to pain? And so I can encourage the audience, if you want to, go look it up. It's called the Sandler Pain Funnel. It's all over the internet. We couldn't keep it from, showing up if we wanted to, I think, at this point. So our gift to the world, right? But you've got a couple of questions in there that really help take a conversation from that surface level problem and bring it all the way down into the personal and financial impact. So, Anthony, would it make sense if we kind of walk through those together?
Yeah, that absolutely would. That's absolutely, we need to go through that so we can, the audience can see that. And I really want you guys to get this, how important this is, the science of understanding where your buyer's at.
Yep, absolutely. So if you take maybe the first question, and it's not about scripting this conversation, because humans are humans. You want to be able to move fluidly through that dialogue, but here's a framework for how to do it. So if you think of the first question, it might be some version of, can you tell me more about that? So if there's a problem that's shared, hey, we've got a problem or a challenge with fill in blank. The seller says, great. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And maybe the first thing to understand there is that people have a tendency not to, speak in complete thoughts. So even what might feel like a full share is not really a full share. And if you ask someone to expand on it, then they'll take that as having not said enough, and then they'll add to it. And usually what they add is the stuff that's most important. So instead of just taking that problem as a problem statement and saying, I think I get it, but can you tell me a little bit more about it? They'll start sharing, right? We start going deeper on it. And so that kind of becomes question one. Question two, though, and this goes, I'll wander a little off topic and then bring it back. So question two would be, can you be specific and maybe give me an example of what it looks like? All right. Now, there's a couple of really important purposes to asking that question. The first one is what I would call cognitive dissonance. All right. So, there's always these competing thoughts that people have in their head where they're trying to figure out, do I want to pay attention to a conversation? Do I want to disengage from it? And one of the main criteria is it relevant to me? Right. If it's relevant, I'll stay engaged. If it's not, I'll disconnect. Right. So if you ask someone to provide a specific example of the issue, in their mind's eye, they start to relive it. So I say, sure, Anthony, the other day I was walking around, here's what happened. This is who was involved in it. That's where I saw it take place. And so they're reliving it now. It's real form. It's not just conversation, it's experiential. And what happens on that one too, if we just kind of wander real quick and then we'll get back to the funnel, is that there are 4 different, we'll say, buying emotions that people are likely to take action on. One of them matters way more than the other 3. All 4 of them people take action on, but one of them matters most. So the first one would be what we call a present pain. So that would be an issue that's happening today. It's something that needs to take action on today. It's a present issue, right?
So can I apply it to my life?
Jump
So
in, yeah.
if I were to say, my present issue, when I talk to someone about construction, my
Yep.
present issue, my people can't turn projects over on time.
There you go.
They're not turning it over on time, and my boss is mad. I'm not meeting sales weeks. There's my current pain is my people aren't turning projects over on time.
Yes, so that'd be a present issue, right? It's in front of you. You see it that way. So that's buying emotion 1. Then you got buying emotion 2 would be a future pain, right?
Yeah. This is going to keep happening. I'm going to not make my bonus. My boss is going to be mad. Our company's not going to make it be as profitable. I've got all these operations people I can't satisfy. Yep. Yeah, there's thinking about what's going to happen if my projection of my current course happens. Is that kind of the idea?
Absolutely. But you take that one and just between the 2. So the second issue is kind of over here, right? I might deal with it maybe at the end of the 4th quarter. The present one is right in front of me, right?
Yep.
And then you've got 2 other buying emotions. One would be present pleasure, right? So sometimes the lens is through the pleasure lens. So instead of saying, my people are having a hard time turning projects, present pleasure might be, I think we can win more business today if we were better at turning projects. So it's looking at it as a pleasure, almost not necessarily an issue, if that makes sense.
Yeah. To them, for us, the people that we're selling to, what I try to put in their mind is, what would it be like to have a group of people that take care of this problem, right? Let me show you how we do it for the biggest, fastest growing companies. And when you see this, we'll be able to identify where the problems are happening in your system, and having a system like ours come, attached to you, will give them an opportunity to see that it doesn't have to be like this forever, that they can bring in a group of pros that can support them in this, and everybody on their team will elevate because of working with that group.
Yeah, so now they'd be looking at like that pleasure lens, Anthony. And then the 4th one would be future pleasure, right? So some version of, hey, if we do these cool things, we got projects coming up that are going to be great. At some point, a couple of months from now, they're going to, return investment for us. So they're looking at that problem being solved as like a future pleasure. And so the challenge is that prospects don't always bring present pain to the conversation. If they bring the other 3 buying emotions, they're real, but they're not necessarily actionable in the same way present pain is. And maybe I can give a quick example, and then we'll get back to this pain funnel here. So let's say, good news, Anthony, you won the lottery, right? You bought a ticket, you won the lottery. It was the big one, right? $1 billion. So,
Let's go.
Yeah, we're going to go celebrate together. But we've got this, a winning ticket sitting in your hand, Anthony. So the buying emotion you likely experience first is present pleasure, which is to say, like, this is exciting, right? I've got all this money now, and then you wander into future pleasure, which is, what can I buy with it, right? And so those are the first 2 buying emotions maybe that you experience. But on your way to the bank, somebody kneecaps you and steals the ticket, right? Now you've got present pain. Ooh. And so as good as those other buying emotions were, which one's going to take over until it's satisfied? Well, it's present pain, right?
That's right.
Am I going to the bank or am I going to the hospital? I have to go to the hospital first, then I can go back to the bank. So when we're having these conversations, when we ask for specific examples, even if the buying emotion was not present pain, when someone relives and shares that example, it becomes present pain, because they'll take the one that's most relevant or most top of mind and present. So it just kind of brings it back to that right buying emotion.
Well, can I talk about that for 1 second? Because I feel like sometimes when I go to ask them about their current pain, I don't know if they're embarrassed or afraid that if they tell me it, now I'm going to sell them and they're going to be stuck buying from me, right? Does that trigger the buyer's cycle?
Yeah, there's a challenge with that. When we talk about questioning strategies, we'll go back to that one a little bit. We'll talk about negative reverse psyching, Anthony. Yep. So I think I could bring it in. But it's also a litmus test. I'm glad you brought that up. It's a litmus test to the first 2 stages we talked about: bonding and rapport, and upfront contract. So bonding and rapport is about trust and credibility. Upfront contract is about permission to say no. So if there's any friction on sharing, then we just have to back up. We either didn't establish rapport well, or we don't have a clear upfront contract where people know they can disengage. It's okay. And so that kind of gives a litmus test to how well we set the first two stages up.
I love that. So anytime we realize that in the process we have friction, we go back and notice that we didn't set something up in a previous. We might have to drop back a step and really recreate those agreements, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. The problem doesn't, it shows up in the stage, but it's not created there. It was a prior stage. We've got to go back, revisit that one, see if we can move forward from it. Nailed it, Anthony.
Nice, nice. All right. So I think that's something, sellers, as you're doing this, really start to notice that's the building block to remember. Look, it's not that they're not there, just that we didn't set it up properly in the cycle.
Yep. Absolutely. And so we think about some of the other questions in there. If we could break some of them down. So we've got, can you tell me more about that? Could you be specific? Give me an example. And then you might ask some version of how long has it been a problem? Right.
Mm,
And, for different sellers selling different things, the answer there matters more one way versus another way. So if you sold IT services, right, the person said it's been a problem for 24 hours. Well, that might be a really big issue, right? You can't
that's
be
right.
down for 24 hours there. But if you are doing, some big construction project management solution, and they said it's only been a problem for the last day or two, it might not be a problem for a long enough length of time for them to invest resources to fix it. It's got to marinate a little bit, right?
That's right.
So we want to know, just kind of from their perspective, how long has it been an issue? And this is where it gets a little tricky here. And I'll try to explain it as best I can in our conversation, Anthony. But now you might ask, well, what have you tried to do to fix it? Right. And here's an important one. There's three competitors in the way of someone deciding to invest resources to fix a problem. The first competitor is doing nothing.
Mm,
Right. So sometimes status quo is the biggest competition in the way. Prospects just not willing to do anything other than keep their current course. Right.
mm,
Second competitor is physical competition. So it might be someone else that competes in the space that seller competes in. And so they're competing against, physical competition for the deal. And then the third competitor is some version of a prospect maybe wanting to get to know enough information to try to do it on their own with internal resources and not use external resources like the salesperson in their organization. So if they can get, enough information, maybe they can go to someone on their team who might have the skill set to be able to use that information, try to solve it for them internally.
got it. So you're saying take your technology, they're going to suck enough technology out of you, and then apply it to their team.
Absolutely. Right. So that
Yeah,
might
yeah,
be the
got it.
third version of it. Yeah. So one of those competitors is in the way. So the question, what have you tried to do to fix it, is really a chance to have your potential client explain to you the competitive landscape. So they might say something like, well, we tried to do it on our own. Right. Or they might say, we've got a person who we've worked with for a number of years who we went to and they couldn't fix it. Or they might say something like, we've talked to a couple of your competitors, we haven't really found a good solution yet. So what they're doing is acknowledging that the competition has not fixed it, right? They've got competitive environments, but those competitors have created the pain, or at the very minimum, they haven't solved the pain, right?
That's right. That's right.
So we want that to come out of the conversation, so we don't have to defend against why we're better, why they're worse. We can let them figure that out on their own as long as we ask good questions. And then we want to pair that one with one that might sound even weirder, Anthony, but it would be on the response. You want to ask, well, did it work? Right. And
Oh,
I
there
and
you
I
go.
mean I mean that one is an honest question. I think sometimes when we're training our clients and they ask, well, if they told me it didn't work, why would I ask them if it worked? Well, you want to be intentional about that. Think about how many things, Anthony, that you tried to do on your own, right? That like I had a fence issue, right? In my backyard, I got this nice fence. I had a company put it in. One of the boards came off, right? So I went out there and I hammered it back in, right? Now, if I had a seller from a fence company say, well, what have you tried to do to fix the issue? I said, well, I just went back there and I hammered it back in. And they skipped forward from it and didn't ask if it worked. They'd miss out on my big problem, which is that it didn't work, right? It it popped right back off again. Something I did there was not done appropriately, right? And so for me, it'd be good to recognize solving it on my own, Anthony, I have not been successful with, right?
That's right.
And if
That's
I
right.
can
And
acknowledge that, then I can maybe be open to having someone come in and do it for me.
I think that's ultimately I see that in our sales cycle all the time, that they've tried other solutions, they tried something, and either the way the company that they worked with delivered it that didn't take root, or it wasn't articulated in a process where, just bringing someone in, uh, someone else doing the work was great, but it didn't help my overall program, right? A problem, a part of the problem was solved, but not my overall problem wasn't solved.
Absolutely. Right. And then we got a framework for a couple other questions. I'll rattle these ones off. We keep digging into this. So if we have them comfortably sharing that what they've tried to do didn't work, right? Now they've got some challenges they need some help with outside of their four walls. And now we want to quantify it. And that's where we get into this impact, personal and financial impact. And the question is some version of how much do you think it's cost you? And there's a deeper dive. I don't know if we'll be able to get into it today, but how do you figure out the real answer to that question? Do the math. But having a framework for how much they think it has cost them to not solve the issue. We kind of started off with that. People will buy solutions to problems they know are more expensive to keep than they are to invest in fixing, right? I've got $1 million problem. I know I can invest $1 million in it and it goes away for the next 10 years. That's a good return on investment. I should find that $1 million.
Right, and for me in that sales cycle, that's an easy one to look at, like, "Hey, look, these projects that didn't turn over on time, what did that cause you in sales weeks?" If a company says, "Hey, look, I clear, after everything, I clear $6,000 a week, in profitability per store, per location, or $60,000 per week per store," I can look at that number and really see, "Hey, if the solution's this," right? I can really quantify it and make it a much easier decision logic for them.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. And, when we pair that into maybe this budget conversation, there's something I think is also important. It's called benchmarking. And here's where we get into human dynamics again, too. If we don't benchmark pain with a dollar associated to it, typically the first time money resources come up in these sales conversations is when we start talking about solutions. And so
Mm,
then that becomes comparative value and return on investment rather than the cost of the actual issue itself. We want that one to be the first number and use that in reference to what an investment in fixing might look like, not the other way around. And so,
nice.
we find that happens often when people don't quantify that pain first, right? They talking about solutions. This is how much it costs, and that becomes comparative value.
No,
So,
but if I could show them, "Hey, look, every week that you don't turn a store over on time, or every time that we don't qualify a bid properly, this is why you blow your budgets," and you multiply that times weeks, times, projects, times, over collectedness of a year, it
yep,
becomes really, really clear that they're costing themselves lots and lots of money, and it's not a hard one to figure out, right? An unmanaged program or an unmanaged process, the impact of that, starts making it clear, and they know it. Sometimes when I can really show the total cost of it, it gets right in their face, and I go, okay, look, that now I can see how I can change. By the way, I'm bringing a solution that will gain this for our company, right?
yeah.
And there's a pride in solving that, which is ultimately what I believe they really want to do.
Yep, absolutely. And just remembering that, I think we've talked about it a couple of times. I'll remind the audience as often as I can. People like to buy things. Companies like to buy things. When it makes sense to do it, it's a good day for everyone. They don't like being sold stuff, though. That's where the pushback and the friction comes from, right? So we've got two more questions maybe to roll out of this pain funnel thing. The next one would be, how do you feel about that? Right. Yeah, and I remember talking to our friend Joe DeSanto about that, right? And Joe was saying, I didn't understand that question when I first learned it. And I don't know that I did either. But really, it's about how do you feel about that, right? Like, what is your connection to this? Do you have a connection to it? Could you take it or leave it? Does it matter? Like, how do you feel about it? And if you've had this conversation the right way, what you'll hear is some version of an emotional connection, which is a good thing because that means now there's something real to fix. And if there is an emotional connection, I think we didn't get pain. We want to go back through and kind of cycle the conversation to something else again, see if there's another option. So how does it make you feel, right? And then the last one, I think this is a critical one that most people miss too, is have you given up trying to deal with it?
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
and
kind of become kind of non-emotional, just like, that's just the way the business is. Oh, that's I have to deal with that. It becomes, I no matter what I do, it's always going to be like this. It's like this over. It's like you've just thrown in the towel.
absolutely. And some organizations and some people have when it comes to certain pains. They know it's real, they know it's a problem, but they've got so many band-aids on it at this point. It's turned into a tourniquet, and it seems like it's working, right? So
Yep.
they're moving on to other stuff. So we want to ask them, have you given up trying to deal with it? Is it something you want to take action on? And so that kind of opens up this pain funnel conversation. So again, a framework, right? Any of those questions, they can be asked in the way we talked about them here, but really it's like this framework for how you navigate towards a problem you get up at the top and move it through so you get something that's actionable pain down at the bottom of it. and it'll change, right? If it's done the right way, it goes from the surface level to the reasons, and then ultimately to the personal and financial impact. So, that would be a deep dive into pain in understanding it. And then maybe I can give a little more direction and guidance. How do you enter this conversation? That's the pain funnel, but how do you exit it? There's this thing called SVIC, right? So, Anthony, I think it's always a challenge in these conversations where both parties are trying to make sure that they are both on the same page, right?
Yep.
So, not in a weird way, but
Right.
often enough, the seller should be feeding back the conversation they've heard. So, the S in SVIC is just to summarize, right? So, if I've had that conversation, I've gone through those questions we've been talking about, and I say, hey, Anthony, let me just read my notes back. All right, the issue that you've got is this. This is how much it's costing you. Here's what you've tried to do about it. This is not working. Do I have all that right? Right? Do I understand what's going on there in the way you wanted me to understand it? And so now we've got good summary. Both parties feel heard and understood. We're on the same page. The next piece is, though, kind of set up this framework for this budget conversation, which we'll talk about in another week or so. So the V is to validate it. And I think this would be interesting. I'll ask you the question because you're a business owner and you're working 1,000 miles an hour some days, right? Maybe 10,000 miles an hour
Every day, every day.
every day, right? So if I said, Anthony, this is a problem, right? And you and I agree that it's a problem, but look, you're running a complicated business. Most owners I talk to have got some list that they've got either formal or in their head where they've prioritized what they're going to be investing in. And they've got a top priority, then they've got a second priority, then they've got a third priority, and maybe that list goes out to 10 priorities. Where does this conversation fit in the list? Is it the top priority? Is it the second? Is it the third? Is it the fourth? And so it's just a chance to validate it through the organization. Because if it's the fourth or fifth priority, where's the money being spent? Well, not here, right? Doesn't mean it's not a problem, but those other priorities are going to be taking any expendable resources that haven't been earmarked for fixing this thing, right? So we just want to understand where's that at. Now, if you've done a good job with pain, when you get to the validation side, you hear things like it's top priority, right? We can't keep spending this much money per store. We've got to get in front of it. So it's top priority. Good. So we got the validating on the top priority side. The next one would be importance. So the S is summary, V is validate, I is important. For that, it would be to the individual you're having the conversation with. And this could work a couple of different ways. If you have to sell up through an organization, you're going to need to build a champion. And so it's important to understand their level of importance to this conversation. If you're talking to ultimate decision makers, you're going to ask them to put in some effort in the relationship. So it's just as important to understand their level of commitment. But the importance side would be like a scale of 1 to 10. So if it's the top priority for the business, how important is it for you personally to see this fixed? Right? Like, what's your personal connection to seeing it fixed on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 would be I'm fully invested in seeing it fixed. I want to take that win. 1 would be, I know it's important to the company, but for me personally, I've got some other things I'm working on. And so again, is it a 10 out of 10? Is it a 1 out of 10? Where does it sit? Because, a good seller, Anthony, if you have a potential client, they're going to do business with you from your commitment standpoint. Is it fair to say you're a 10 out of 10 in solving the issue, period, right?
That's right. That's right.
Right? You guys are all in. I'm all in, right?
That's
So
right.
if I've got a potential client who says I'm like a 7, I'm pretty quick to say, hey, look, I appreciate that, and it's honest. Here's the challenge. I'm a 10 on commitment if I'm working together with a client. If you're a
That's right.
7 and I'm a 10, I'm going to go from being a potentially good partner to a giant pain in your ass, right? Because I'm going to be asking, right? I'm fully in on this thing, and if you're not fully in on it, let's not do it.
Well, the only way it's going to work for us is we've learned if we don't, we've tried like partial commitments, and we've tried, and look, at the end of the day, they're all pissed off. Right? We can't. We've tried that where someone isn't fully committed. They want to try something a little bit, and what ends up happening is the pain just continues. We can't get enough momentum or speed or solution to really solve the bigger conversation. And so we've learned it has to be all in. And if we don't do so, just somewhere they're going to be mad today. If we give them the price, they're going to be mad today, but they'll hate us later on, right? I'd rather have them a little bit. Hey, that budget's a little bit more than I want to spend, but here's what you get when you're done. You've got, for us, it's not even about the money. It's really more about, I don't want to disappoint you. Right?
Absolutely. Right. So
I'll
we've
do.
got to be locked up.
That's right. I've got to give you, a team of people that are going to go in there and affect the system, and it has to be a kind of holistic approach to it. So Yeah, sometimes people will go, "Oh, can we just try this? And can you just do this little piece of it?" I'm like, "You got it, but we're just gonna. You're not solving the problem. You're fighting the fire. You're firefighting instead of stopping the fires."
Absolutely. And, I think every seller hopefully should align to this. You know your stuff works. If you're not fully committed to your stuff working, you probably shouldn't be selling it in the first place. So that's not the problem. It's, are both parties connected to working together in partnership, right? Because when that happens, you get a beautiful relationship. When it doesn't, somewhere it's going to fall apart, right? And then the last piece there, so you've got summarize, importance, validation, and then it's just confirmation. So do I have all this right? It's the top priority in your business. You're 10 out of 10 fully committed to it, not putting your words in your mouth. Is that how you wanted me to hear it? And now we've got real pain, right? You can picture a potential client that's willing to have that conversation and share that kind of information. We haven't agreed to work together yet because there's been no solution provided, but we've agreed there's a problem that we both realize is important enough to get into the weeds with, right?
I got it, and that's we we want to create this. I mean, look, not every customer. We talked about this a couple times. Not every potential meeting that we have turns into a customer, right? We want to identify that maybe there's not a good fit for each other, and like you talked about, maybe somewhere down the front, leave that holistically and healthy, right? We went to identify it. We couldn't find a solution that works for both of us, and that doesn't end up becoming our customer. But leave it healthy, and then someday in the future when it does become painful, right? It's a problem today, but later on when it becomes painful, they have a resource to go back to. And how do we identify that? So if we're looking at, I don't know if we're going to get in more kind of in the weeds a little bit on that, but look, if we identify that this isn't the right fit, how do we leave that healthy, and then so that later on I can come back to it
Yeah.
effectively.
And this is the key for the upfront contracts, right? So if we get to a point where maybe we realize it's not the right fit, I can go back to my upfront contract, Anthony, and say, when we first got together today, we both agreed if it wasn't a good fit, either I'd let you know or you'd let me know. My sense is one of us should be sharing that right now, and I want to do it without any pressure, right? So if you want to tell me no, totally okay. That might be the place where you get to execute that. We'll shake hands, we'll part ways as friends. Is that what you'd like to tell me? And so we just kind of comfortably can get to that. And if we need to, sometimes, we can take the opportunity to share no too, because we can't find good pain. And that's our responsibility as a seller in that partnership, is to be able to comfortably disengage. I've got a meeting coming up here later on this week with a prospect, potential client, will say, from almost 4 years ago that really just didn't have pain. And I said, I'm paraphrasing, this was 4 years ago, some version of, my sense is this is a problem, but my sense is also it's not a big enough problem where we need to figure out what we do with it now. Is that fair? And they said, yeah, Eric, yeah, that's a good point. It's just not something we need to take action on right now. I said, cool, right? How do you want us to stay connected to each other on the off chance it changes to the degree that we might want to work together? And we laid out a plan for just touching base with each other. Like, fast forward, a couple of weeks ago, we agreed to get started, and we're working together now, right? And we're working through some kickoff stuff later this week.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, and the pain, we talked about it today, but the pain doesn't go away, right? Sometimes it just solves itself. Maybe companies get sold or new management comes in, but for the most part, whatever the challenge is that's being dealt with, it's just got to bake a little more, Anthony, if it's not fully baked when the seller meets the prospect, right?
Well, and so my judgment is that, and I've noticed myself in the sales cycle, right? Not letting go of the sale, like trying too hard to take it in there and push it and be pushy and create it, and even if sometimes it felt manipulative, right? I can look at it, and the problem with that is that I leave the conversation and I see that person at a convention. They're like, "Hey, I'm not talking.
Yeah,
He's
right.
pushy,"
Run,
right?
run.
If I left it right, right, I left it open and curious and friendly and right? Like getting to a point where it's a hard appetite to watch out for, right? Whenever you're there and you're trying to ABC always be closing. You're always trying that all that old mentality came from, I think I was trained by mostly car salesmen, right? They didn't want you to walk off the lot, right? And if you walked off the lot, you're done. And like so some of that left me, and I can see how the relationships with those people end up in the industry because I want to be able to look at people no matter where I'm at with integrity to the conversation. Look, it didn't fit. Hey, and Bob or Betty, I'm still great relationship with you. And look, something happens or somebody has something happen. Our relationship is of one of integrity. and we both were willing to say what was true, and I didn't feel manipulated or used or that the dirty end of that sales cycle.
Yeah, because it's true, Anthony, and I don't want to be shy about saying this. If you close hard, you'll close business, right? But you got to deal with that later, and I think that's why most people don't like selling, is it just feel kind of icky afterwards, or slimy having to do that. And as a career, it's not my cup of tea, right? My preference would be to have the relationship, have the relational value, and have the courtesy to be able to comfortably disengage when it's not the right time. And it's been my experience that by not providing solutions to people that don't have actionable pain, we've done better business when it finally becomes real, because we were honest in the dialogue when we first met. And that's trust and that's credibility, right?
That's awesome. All right, this is the stuff that I love about you, Eric, and what in this process is really creating integrity in the sales. This isn't a career of slimy salesmanship. This is one about open integrity and looking for the great connections that we can both serve well together. I serve that customer well, and they're served by us well, in a really mutual, healthy relationship.
Yeah. And what do you know, Anthony? Those ones that you treat perfectly and honestly and ethically, they give you more business than you know what to deal with most of the time, because they can't wait to tell their friends about you, right?
Exactly right. That you become an integral part of their partnership and long-term relationships. And that's ultimately what we want. If you talk someone into a deal, you might get a little bit there, but you wasted your time, right? The long-term effect, and we've learned that for us, we want long-term customers, we want long-term relationships. Because first of all, the investment in the relationship takes so much to begin with. We don't really start getting profitable into a relationship until we've really got a system down for it. So it's important for us to find long-term great customers.
Yeah, love that, Anthony. So I hope that this was helpful today. We're digging about pain, think it in, right? There's a process, there's a concept for it. Again, pain and problems are different things. Hopefully, it's one of the thoughts that everyone takes away from this. If you sell to the problem, you got a lot of competition. You can slow it down a little bit, bring it to the level of pain. You're a better partner. You're solving an issue that most people haven't said out loud. Lots of more honest dialogue, and fewer competitors are sitting in that space for sure.
Eric Meier, you are it's amazing to have you on this podcast and for us to do this whole sales cycle. I know that I get so much out of it. I know the audience, I've got some great feedback from the audience about what they're getting back from it. People love what you're doing. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best place to catch up with you?
Hey, absolutely. Send us an email. Come directly to me, Erik, Erik, period, Meier, Meier, at Sandler.com. Feel free to do that. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to do that as well. And follow me there. I'll follow you back.
Eric, you are a treasure to have around, and this whole sales cycle. I look forward to the next got a few series coming up. We got more coming at you, and you guys are going to love this. So, as always, thanks for listening. Please put some comments down below. Anything you got in the comments down below, anything you're feeling, or anything you want us to solve in a future one we're working on, put that down there, and we'll add that in there for you. And as always, we're grateful for you listening. Thank you.